Hi, everyone. Give everybody a minute to get into the room and ask everyone to, Nancy, are you able to mute everyone to start? Have a few more people. We'll just give it another minute, but I welcome you all. My name is Mary Coe. I am the branch reference librarian at Fairfield Woods Branch Library and co-chairs of the One Book, One Town Committee. And we're very, very happy to be presenting this program about...
George, I'm really trying to figure this out. You need to
mythical creatures in literature.
Cookies. No.
I'm sorry, I realized I was muted. I'm very happy to be having this program tonight with our perfect host, I think, Michael Bielawa. And you may know Michael from past library programs or from Bridgeport Library or Fairfield Library. He's authored several regional histories, and his essays have addressed such diverse topics as the mysterious creature of Lake Champlain, Bridgeport, Connecticut's crying stone statue, and the bizarre disappearance of a Hartford minor league baseball manager, which I'm very curious about that. He's lectured on the National Endowment for the Arts in Baton Rouge and has been a moderator for the Connecticut Humanities Council's Literature for a Lifetime discussion series. So Michael, thank you so much. I'm going to turn this over to you. Feel free to put comments in the chat during the presentation, but if everyone would just hold questions for the end of the presentation, that would be great. So Michael, thank you so much. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary and Nancy, the branch manager at Fairfield Woods Public Library in Fairfield, Connecticut. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody tonight and help celebrate Fairfield, Connecticut's One Book, One Town selection this year. The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. For folks who are familiar with the book, it's a wonderful read. It's an endearing novel, a fantasy, and it deals with lots of creatures. I mean, so many creatures, we can't discuss all of them tonight. So the ones, the creatures that I focused on are ones that we've all heard about and have perhaps read about. And I'm not, I'm not being able to advance it, Miss Mary. Let's see. There we go. Okay. It took a second. And the creatures that are in Klune's book, again, there's so many different references that I'm just going to focus on a few. And the ones that, as you can see, I outlined the criteria for tonight's presentation. We're going to look at a few select creatures. We're going to consider where they've appeared in the past in literature, in major literature throughout the world's history. And we're not looking from a mythological or religious perspective, but of course, both of those play a heavy role in defining how we've imagined these mythical creatures. But we're going to come to an understanding of what they look like, what they're capable of doing, what their capabilities are, and where they've appeared in great works of literature. If anybody should bump into any of the creatures that we're discussing, we'll have some kind of ideas of which one might be benign and which ones might be evil. That's always good to know. And overall, we're going to have fun with this program. And it doesn't want to. The first one, I'm having some trouble advancing the slides. It's very strange. There seems to be a delay or a pause on it as I'm moving the slides forward. In the novel, in Klune's novel, I mean, who doesn't like Theodore, the gentle and shy Wyvern? And he's a small creature, you know, you could fit him in your lap. And oftentimes in the novel, he nuzzles against a person's throat and sits on their shoulder, just like an adorable creature. In reality, the wyvern wasn't so cuddly and is a hideous creature. On the right side of the screen is a 21st century rendition. And that's what I think, except without the kind of maybe evil looking face, that's probably what Theodore, that's how I imagine Theodore appearing. The medieval manuscript dates from the 14th century, and it's kept in the manuscript, not the wyvern. The manuscript is kept in the National Library of Wales. And again, it dates from the 1300s. Wyverns, when we're talking about the creatures, you're going to notice that they resemble dragons, but they're completely different creatures. Wyvern, the name itself is derived from a Latin word, vipera, meaning viper or adder, and a snake, a poisonous snake. The N was added at the beginning of the 1600s. So the commencement of the 17th century, in the written works, the wyvern became wyvern with an N. You'll see right away, and I use this image because it gives you the characteristics right off the bat. 2 legs, front forearm legs, and wings, usually attached to those arms. A dragon has 4 legs and can breathe fire, and the wyvern cannot breathe fire. Still don't pet the wyvern. They're not known for being in good moods. There's not much of a discussion or an appearance of wyvern as the creature in literature. Joseph Le Fanu wrote a thriller book, a mystery with supernatural elements called The Wyvern Mystery, but it doesn't deal with wyverns. It deals more with their use as heredity in shields. Now, you'll see the wyvern in medieval crests, celebrating the family's lineage, also carved in medieval objects, like, for instance, this, oh boy, it's, let me see here. I want to get the credit. Mazara cord. It's not misery or it's a Mazara. It's a Mazara cord. And these were in churches. These are, oops. These are the carved images in churches. And what they were used for were panels where people could lean back against during extremely long services. You'll see one here, another wyvern. And I like this one too. And then I like this image because it gives you an idea. That seat can drop for the seated portion of the church service, but when it's in the upright position, you could lean back against it. So it'll take some of the strain off your lower back. And the church services were extremely long. I'm going to go back one slide and back another, and you can see the on the top, right above the wyvern's head, in this instance, kind of like a ledge in the raised position. So a person could lean against the one on the left, and when needed, they could drop that seat and be a little bit more comfortable on the right. I don't know if there would be cushions in the Middle Ages. Now, the wyvern, as I mentioned, resembles a dragon, and it's a part of the dragon family. This just gives the lineage of a variety of creatures. The wyvern is in the top middle, and they're kind of to size. Dragons much, much larger, and we're going to talk about that creature in a little bit. And I also enjoy this comparison image here, that it shows the drake, the dragon, the worm, and the wyvern. And I really enjoy that. The mythical creature that has been exceptionally highlighted, in literature is the dragon. And you can see this fellow kind of almost like a serpent slithering around a huge boulder in a cavern or cave. And he's holding on to a human skull, and there's lots of bones around this creature. All of those signs should say no trespassing, keep away, dragons, very bad, very dangerous. And in Western mythology, there are 4 types of dragons, and each one represents fire. There are 4 separate ones. One represents fire, earth, air, and water. And the breakdown of those elements are important in any observation of or appreciation of medieval alchemy or medieval mythology and medieval literature. Elements are always broken down, and they always deal, or usually deal, with those 4: fire, earth, air, water. There are Western dragons, as I mentioned, which are European, and there are Eastern dragons, which we'll see during Chinese New Year. And Asia celebrates the Eastern dragon, and they are their features usually have a mane of feathers, and they have tiger paws. They're benevolent. They're a good omen. Eastern dragons good, Western dragons bad. Western dragons, as part of their mythology, their mythos, is that they have 4 legs, they can fly, they can breathe fire. Sometimes their breath itself is poisonous, and what they like to do is they enjoy eating sheep, cattle, and humans. The word dragon itself comes from the Latin word which means to guard or guardian, dracone, and one of their favorite pastimes, and I'll mention this in a little bit too, one of their favorite pastimes is finding and then guarding treasure. Historically, in literature, the very first mention of a dragon is in the epic poem Gilgamesh, which is actually the oldest piece of human literature. It's like mind-boggling to think that some of these, yes, they look like the cereal, shredded wheat cereal. This one has the sugary covering. That's what they look like. But these are clay tablets that are from Yale. They're in Yale, just down the road from Fairfield. Remainders of the oldest aspect of human literature. And you can see from the caption that about 2800 BCE, before Common Era, you can think of it as BC, there was a real individual king, Gilgamesh, of a Sumerian city-state that's located in today's southern Iraq. He left his mark because 500, 600 years later, people start writing about him on these clay tablets. And again, the important part to remember about this is Gilgamesh, it's the oldest epic poem. It's a beautiful piece of literature. Here is Gilgamesh. And he's on the right. He has a very long beard, braided. He's holding onto a snake and a lion, which might represent Gilgamesh's power or control over nature. His very best friend, the companion is what you can call him, is Enkidu. Enkidu is the fellow holding the spear, and he has horns like a bull. And originally they were enemies. They disliked each other, and they were set by the gods to fight it out. And during this fight, when it kind of came to a draw, they became best friends. Gilgamesh is 2/3 God and 1/3 part man. And put Gilgamesh 2/3 and his 1/3 together, he represents humanity, while the companion Enkidu represents the wild man or nature. They went on a bunch of adventures once they became friends. And within Gilgamesh, stormy heart to struggle with stormy heart. And the epic poem, it's a story of life and how these enemies would finally come to love one another. And in my copy of Gilgamesh, I'm going to hold it up right now. there's a variety of different versions. This one I found very accessible, and you could see it's not a long read, but super enjoyable. One of the adventures that the companion and Gilgamesh went on was after a dragon. Now here, what looks like a human form, but it's a giant. Depending on the translation you read in ancient Sumerian, it's either a giant, a hideous giant, but it also can be defined as a dragon within the wording. This giant and the dragon, they both breathe fire. And it's Humbaba or Hawawa. Humbaba or Hawawa. Evil demon giant or evil demon dragon. Protects the cedar forest. And Gilgamesh and then Kedu, they go out on an adventure and they have to subdue, capture, kill the giant or dragon. And here is an ancient carving showing the activity of Gilgamesh and Enkidu subduing that ancient dragon. 20th century, 21st century artists, I like to call this the late night news version. You can kind of see what looks like a Conan barbarian figure is attacking kind of a giant dragon, giant slash dragon, because you can see the tail in the background, the hideous claws, the breathing of the fire. Again, if folks aren't familiar with it or they haven't read Gilgamesh in a long time, it's a super easy read, depending on which English translation you get. And it's just a wonderful book about man and nature, dealing with gods, dealing with adversity. It's really the focus of the theme of the book is on man's mortality. And there's references that when you're reading it, say, hey, wait a second, this sounds just like Noah and Noah's Ark. I mean, the book has a little bit of everything, and it's a really wonderful read on a variety of levels. The second dragon I'd like to mention in literature is from Beowulf, and this is perhaps the first folio, the original. It was written in England. It takes place in the Scandinavian countries, although the work was written in what is today England, sometime written between the 700s and the year 1000 and 99. So somewhere between 700 and the year 1000, give or take. They figure that's when it was created. They don't know who wrote it. It's called, the person who wrote it or transcribed it is the poet of Beowulf. I would guarantee some kind of major international prize if anybody was able to actually identify positively the anonymous writer. Just as Gilgamesh is the earliest, oldest piece of human literature, Beowulf is the earliest European piece of literature. And we have Beowulf battling a dragon. Now, I have to say, let me see, that in Beowulf, if for folks who know the story, the Dane warrior is consulted to fight the fierce human type beast called Grendel. Well, I'm not going to give the whole story away, especially for people who haven't read it, but Beowulf the knight goes out and deals with Grendel the monster. And well, this really, really pisses off Grendel's mother. And now he has to deal with Mrs. Grendel. So Beowulf always has his hands filled. And when he's not in a mead hall throwing back some delicious, alcoholic mead, he's always off fighting monsters. One of the monsters is a dragon. Now, this dragon, let me see, this dragon was guarding a treasure in a barrow, which is a mound, a grave of a very important chieftain or warrior, a female or male. And in this barrow, they would put valuables. this was a huge burrow that had tons and tons of treasure, and the dragon hid there for, again, as I mentioned, for 300 years, until a slave, a servant, who was being beaten by his master in Scandinavia, ran off. He just wanted to get away from that one day's beating. He was having a tough day in the fields. So he ran and he accidentally stumbled upon this burrow. He crawled in and he was like, oh boy, there's treasure everywhere. And the dragon is asleep. Well, this unnamed slave grabs a gold and jewel encrusted goblet, one goblet out of countless goblets with diamonds, emeralds, gold, coins, gilded shields, swords. I mean, a treasure trove. The dragon's not going to miss this one little goblet. And, I'm going to give it to my master just to get back on his good side. Well, the dragon wakes up and immediately he notices, hey, wait a minute, something's missing. I mean, out of a huge treasure trove, imagine a monstrous stadium kind of cavern, stadium big cavern, one gold goblet is missing. And I don't know, why would he be so, and that's the one thing he has to have. He's like, the dragon's like a little spoiled brat, or maybe like a super billionaire. Where's my one goblet? So he gets really upset. And every night he leaves that burrow and he flies amongst the villages, and he's torching the villages, destroying humanity, eating the sheep and cattle, really causing an economic problem in addition to the loss of human life in Beowulf's realm. So now Beowulf, as an old man, has to go out. Hey, Beowulf, we need you again. So he goes out with a hand select group of other knights, and they confront the dragon. Dragon, as I mentioned, is a Latin earlier term for guardian. And what do? They guard treasure. But I love the different names, descriptive names that were used for dragons in Old English. And dragons are variously called Draka, Worm, the Hoard Guardian, the treasure hoard, and the Fire Dragon. And in Old English, the Hoard Guardian is known as the Hoard Weird, the Hoard Weird. And he was also, when it's translated some of the dragon names, one of them comes out as he was the Sky Plague. So you could call a dragon a Sky Plague. I think it's so poetic. And I mean, especially with COVID, we get that idea of it's just a monstrosity, a tragedy, a terrible thing. And dragons were called the Sky Plague. Well, I'm not going to give away the story about Beowulf. We could talk about it afterwards. If you haven't read it, and even if you have, just like Gilgamesh, go back and enjoy Beowulf. He is the inspiration for all the superheroes and all the DC and Marvel comics that you've ever heard of. And born of that anonymous epic poem written sometimes between the 8th and the 11th century, and written and found in England. Now, here's another famous dragon. We're jumping ahead from 2800 BCE to 700 AD to the mid 19th century, and it's Jabberwocky. And you don't say the Jabberwocky; it's Jabberwocky. This dragon had something about the way it was to be entitled. And this is, of course, from the work that we're all familiar with, Lewis Carroll, who was born Charles Lutwidge Dodgson. Dodgson was his last name, Dodgson. And he lived from 1832 to 1898. He was a mathematician who turned children's author. And he suffered from chronic migraines, epilepsy. He had a stammer when he spoke, and he was partially deaf. And on top of it, he's been diagnosed, looking back, as being ADHD. So here was a brilliant man battling a lot of personal ailments. And he wrote, he really enjoyed his family's children. He wasn't married, but his extended family. He enjoyed being with the children on outings, and he would write little nonsense poems. Jabberwocky is the most famous nonsense poem in English language. And I can read something from Beowulf. And Seamus Heaney, I enjoy his version because it has on one side of the page the Old English, and on the right side, the facing page, modern English. And I'm going to read a part of Beowulf, the very beginning, the first few lines, and that will bring in Lewis Carroll's sense of humor, the British poet, the original anonymous poet writing in Beowulf. Huit we gardina in gerdagum, piod singina, pedrum gifron, hoa apollos, Eileen Flemadon. What that translates into is so. The spear Danes in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. When you read down further throughout the epic poem, in its lengthy, there are some sounding words that are going to resonate with our modern ear. Beowulf was a Breum, blade wide sprang. And Beowulf's name was known throughout the north. So Beowulf, blade, his name, wide, sprang. So he was sprung forth. They recognized his name far and wide. So that's Beowulf. And here, as you can see, in Jabberwocky, 'twas brilligan the sleuthy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy weart the borogroves, and the mome wraths outgrabe. In the poem, the knight facing Jabberwocky, Alice hears the poem, doesn't really make heads or tails out of the opening. The rest of it is in 19th century English, easy for us to understand. And well, as Alice goes through her adventures, she runs across Humpty Dumpty, who says he is the most brilliant poet and can recite any poem ever written. In fact, he's so brilliant, he can even recite poems that haven't been written. Oh, that kind of is like, I think, a commentary of Lewis Carroll on Professor Eggheads. But it's cool because Humpty Dumpty explains what these 4 lines mean. And I could just read a couple. This is in a really cool book edited by Donald Gray, Alice in Wonderland. And any of the copies are going to be good. I like the notated ones because, for instance, it explains where to find Humpty Dumpty's quotes. That's a great book. Look for Humpty Dumpty on page 164. And they quote the beginning of the poem, and Humpty Dumpty is, that's enough to begin with, Humpty Dumpty interrupted. There are plenty of hard words there. Brillig means 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the time when you begin broiling things for dinner. Well, that'll do very well, said Alice. And slithy? Well, Humpty Dumpty says, slithy means lithe and slimy. Life is the same as active. You see, it's like a portmanteau. There are 2 meanings packed up in one word. Well, I can't pronounce the French, but it's the suitcases that open up in half. And Humpty Dumpty is, well, it is a two meaning word. And he continues, she continues, I see now, Alice remarked thoughtfully. And what are toves? Well, toves are something like badgers. There's something like lizards, and there's something like corkscrews. Well, they must be a very curious looking creature. That they are, said Humpty Dumpty. Also, they make their nests under sundials, and they also live on cheese. In Alice in Wonderland, Humpty Dumpty goes on to explain the rest of the poem. And again, it's Lewis Carroll mocking Old English. And we're going to next reference one of the 20th century's greatest iconoclasts, John Lennon, who is then in turn, who was loved Lewis Carroll in addition to 50s rock and roll and blues. And his version of an old English Anglo-Saxon type poem, The Land of the Lunapots. It was custard time, and as I snuffed at the haggy pie, the noodles ran about my plunk, which rode my little uncle drunk. Just the play with words, and you could see where Lucy in the Sky comes from, or Dear Prudence, wordplay from two brilliant poets. Look at Jabberwocky, the whole piece. It's just a few stanzas, but it paints, from what we think about Lewis Carroll being for children, a really dark and ferocious tale about a dragon. I love the image. Just some background. Lewis Carroll first wrote the opening here in 1855. It appeared in a magazine article, and then he got the inspiration for Alice in 1862, and 3 years later the story Alice in Wonderland was published. So we're talking 1855, the inspiration, very inspiration, and then 10 years later when the book was published. Again, the most famous English nonsensical poem, which brings us to another famous dragon. We're going to jump ahead another almost 100 years to The Hobbit, written in 1937 by J.R.R. Tolkien. And you can read a little bit about J.R.R. there beneath his photograph, but I included this map and dragon illustration because it's so cool. Not only was Tolkien, wonderful author, these are his own renditions, his drawings. I think he may have relied on his son, or was it his grandson, as the trilogy expanded after The Hobbit. But in The Hobbit, these are his drawings, his story, his drawings. And in The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins enters a secret cave, and he takes off with one treasure cup. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like. And that really angers the dragon. And Tolkien gives his dragon a name, S-M-A-U-G, Smog. And he gets so upset that he too sets out and starts burning all the humans' villages that are around his cave, where Bilbo Baggins, the Hobbit, snuck in and left with one of the small treasure chalices. Again, I'm not going to ruin any of these stories. Got to read The Hobbit as well. It's an easy read, and it's a beautiful story, And you'll see here, I chose these images that appear to be how Smog has left an impression on contemporary artists. And, he's laying there in his vast pile of treasure. And of course, he wakes up just like you can imagine some bloated billionaire waking up on his yacht. Where's my one Cuban cigar? Where is it? And he's overlooking the yacht, another box of Cubans, and all the wealth that's around him. Nope, that one goblet was what he had to have. Dragons have been painted throughout this time, from ancient Sumeria, even through The Hobbit, the early 20th century, as flying and using their fiery breath and poisoned poison breath as enemies of humanity. But starting in the late 20th century and now in the 21st century, there's a variety of non-traditional dragons. And I just fell back on this collection. I think because the author is inspirational to all of us, that the gentleman, Christopher Paolini, who wrote this series, it's called The Inheritance Cycle. He started writing it when he was just a teenager in high school at 15. And he just kind of started writing a story. I mean, how many of us have written stories? Well, he hammered it out into something that, he's not just proud of, but hey, his parents said it was so good, they self-published it. And that's how it was discovered by a publishing agent. And it was so wonderful that it was re-released It was re-released 2 years after the parents self-published it. And so I give a lot of credit to the young Christopher Paolini and the Inheritance Cycle. But there are so many dragon books now out, dating back to the 1970s even, that it would be a separate conversation for us to go into. But I wanted to focus on some contemporary stories about dragons. The next creature we're going to talk about is the gnome character that appeared in Klune's work. It was Paracelsus, and here he is in a color painting, and then a print of him. You can see what the years that he lived. He was a 16th century scholar. A lot of people look at him as the father of European medicine. He started writing medical books in everyday language, everyday usage. But he's primarily known as a mystic and an alchemist. And he wrote a book called On Nymphs, Sylphs, Pygmies, and Salamanders, and Other Spirits. It was published after his death in 1566. And it discusses the supernatural world and how he saw the world, our world, constructed. There was, the visible world exists or coexists with an invisible world. And in these worlds do overlap. And he thought, Paracelsus thought, that there were four elements, again, the four elements, in a material and non-material world. The undines are the nymphs of water. There's water. The sylphs, Sylphs, are nymphs of the air. Salamanders represent fire. And gnomes, also, he called them mountain mannequins. Kind of creepy. Mountain mannequins, gnomes, representing earth. So you have water, air, fire, and earth again. Gnome is derived from the ancient Greek word and it means intelligence, that they offer intelligence about where hidden treasure can be found, but also a version of the ancient word gnome, genomus, means earth-bound or in the earth, within the earth, earth-dwelling. So you put those kind of meanings together, and Paracelsus said, hey, I got an idea for a new entity, a new creature, gnome. And pygmies, in the name of his book, are not the pygmies that were kind of the name used to describe individuals from the continent of Africa in the 19th century. No. Pygmies, according to ancient Greek and Roman mythology and Paracelsus, they were small humans, about half the size of our appearance. So, about 3 feet tall. And this is what Paracelsus this is how he would have envisioned his gnomes. They like to build their houses under earth. They can pass through earth like a fish can pass through water, or humans can pass through air. So they had that power just to wander, become translucent, to pass through any kind of rock or soil. In Klune's novel, Talia, you see her alone. All gnomes prefer to be alone. That's why we see them in gardens. They're earthbound creatures. They enjoy the earth. They like to cultivate the treasures of the earth, and beautiful plants and flowers are some of those treasures. But gnomes don't usually get along with other gnomes. And the only way I could kind of come up with an example was some cats don't get along with other cats. And our cat, Miss Sarah, when she was alive, she would see another cat outside the front door. That cat would come up and tease Miss Sarah, and they would both hiss and scratch at the door. They didn't care for each other's presence in what they considered their own kind of property. This is mine. So gnomes don't get along with other gnomes usually. However, they do get along well with humans. And if you're nice to gnomes, sometimes they'll share the location of a secret a treasure, metals, precious metals. Now, these gnomes too, they're kind of, well, serious looking, maybe a bit brutal. They're as far as literature, the first appearance of the word gnome was in an Alexander Pope poem. The poem was entitled "The Rape of the Lock." Now, the rape of the lock, it doesn't, it's not about a sexual crime. Rape, Alexander Pope was looking at the Latin word for to steal, heist, rob, and the lock is a lock of hair. So a poem, it's about a lock of hair being stolen, being robbed, and how it sets two families at odds. You know, you're kind of getting an idea of Romeo and Juliet, but it sets two families into a feud. And it was a very famous poem, and really the first or the earliest literary use of the term gnome. And that poem was written sometime between 1712 and, you know, revised continually by Mr. Pope through 1714. There are other images of gnomes. And this gnome is a little bit hard to see because most folks will look at the crown of the costume that this gnome is wearing. I'm going to advance. Well, I'm going to let it play for a little bit. Mazurski, in his symphony pictures at an exhibition in the 1870s, he envisioned a gnome as kind of a crab-like creature scuttling across the floor. And this was a royalty in the gnome hierarchy. You can see his face kind of maybe a third of the way down. You'll see two eyes and a nose. The top of his costume is his headdress. But this gnome, it sounds some serious kind of horror element to it. And I love that crabby like a sound that Mazurski created for his version of a gnome. Now, we're moving around the 19th century, looking at different images. Well, here, sorry about the cut off of the music so quick. Here is the gnome that I imagine living by the Cerulean Sea. It's a beautiful painting, 1848. It's a German painting by Karl Spitzwig. Karl Spitzwig did this very romantic version. And of course, the symbolism is ancient Europe or mythical Europe, looking in the shadows, looking out at modern technology, the railroad passing through. The poor gnome here is probably wondering, you know, how long does the realm of myth have? How much time do they have to exist? Again, this gnome looks like the entity that's living in the house by the Cerulean Sea. Here is the very vision of Talia. And I believe that this is where the author, dating from the late 19th centuries forward, this is how most folks have been envisioning the figure of a gnome and seeing the gnomes in the gardens looking like this. This book was published first in Dutch in 1976. The English language version came out the following year, 1977, and it was written by Vil Hugin. Vil Hugin. This is a beautiful book. The interior resembles the cover with explanations and stories, little arrows that point out characteristics of these gnomes. It's just a cool, cool book. And the third creature we're going to look at tonight, and I'm not ending the talk with Sprites. There'll be some more discussion after Sprites. But this is the kind of idea that I get when I'm reading the book, the novel, one for Fairfield's One Book, One Town. The authority on wee folk and British Irish legend myth is Catherine Briggs, and she wrote an encyclopedia of fairies, hobgoblins, brownies, bogies, and other supernatural creatures. It came out the same year as the Dutch book Gnomes came out in 1976. She basically says that sprites are it's just another name for fairy or elf. Now, I'm not quite sure about that, and maybe over the last few decades, 50 or so years, they maybe have taken on their own unique characteristics, and although they're within the fairy or elf family, they're taking on their own identity. Again, here are some renditions of fairy folk, wee folk, elves, sprites. Originally, the word fairies bases its name on the Latin word fate, F-A-T-A-E. And the Latin interpretation of that word is that they direct the destiny of humans, We folk, like the characters in the novel, can influence humans in their businesses, in their homes. They usually help out with chores that are left undone. I know that happens here all the time in my house, and that they also seem to focus on one person in a family. Fairies usually will be, as I said, helpful, but they're really not to be trusted. And you'll always hear about children being kidnapped or people being brought into the fairy realm to watch, let's say, to wash dishes. And when they are released back into the material dimension, our world on Earth, well, how long do you think you were gone for? And 3 years, and it turns out they were washing dishes for 300 years. Terrible nightmare stories. Here is a beautiful piece of music with a painting that I think sums up sprites and fairies. I paired the overture for A Midsummer Night's Dream, written by Felix Mendelssohn, with this painting. I thought that they both went together so well. You get the idea of motion through the woods and the fields, of sprites and fairies, and if you look kind of close, you'll almost see the humanistic outlines of the wee folk as they flit through nature. The cool thing about the music, Mendelssohn wrote this portion of the piece when he was just 17 years old. He loved Shakespeare. His family would read Shakespeare out loud, and they'd all take a part in the play. How was that on cue? That was pretty good. Mendelssohn loved Shakespeare. And I'm gonna click the music off again. So I'm sorry, Felix. I'm sorry, everybody listening. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, the narrator, perhaps one of the main characters, is Puck, Robin Goodfellow, known as Puck, and he's a mischievous sprite. Narrates the action of the play. He sets things in motion, makes some mistakes that he has to undo, but it's a romance, and it's a story about love between people who shouldn't maybe fall in love, and then they correct their behavior and they do fall in love. But that's Shakespeare. He was always writing these slapstick kind of Elizabethan plays. That music came out in Mendelssohn wrote that piece in 1826. Shakespeare wrote A Midsummer Night's Dream, the play, in either 1595 or 1596, 1595 or 1596. And in 1826 was when Mendelssohn wrote that piece of music. But perhaps the most famous sprite in literature is, again, in Shakespeare, in The Tempest. And that Ariel, air spirit, male sprite is called, is called Ariel. And the Tempest, written, as you see, about 1610, 1611. The course of the play takes place over the course of one day, and it's Prospero is a wizard, and he's his oh goodness gracious, I wanted to say his familiar is Ariel, who assists him with his spells and potions. And again, it is a romance. It's again a wonderful play. Both of these are great ways of reading. These are great ways of examining the thought of Elizabethan, so late 1500s, early 1600 views on wee folk, again, on fairies, elves, sprites. And here we'll see some advice that's coming from Ariel, the sprite in The Tempest, whispering in ears, offering our thoughts. You always thought that you had your own kind of voice, or, you know, thoughts in your head. No. It's probably a sprite that's right behind your shoulder, whispering something good for you to accomplish. And here is Prospero looking kind of like Moses with an angel leading the way, but it is in The Tempest. It is in The Tempest. I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I'm hoping that we have more time, because we're just about gone through our time limit, and I do want to save, you know, as much time as needed for questions and answers. But I wanted to break off here with a look of the 3 mythical creatures we've discussed, and talk about how we can find them in our own backyards. And during this break, right before we go into this next brief portion, I have to have a commercial interlude. And just to remind everybody that it's one book, one town, and the author is going to be speaking at the theater in downtown Fairfield at the Sacred Heart University Community Theater. And if you can't make it in person, or you have any concerns about COVID, not to worry, because it will be provided through a Zoom. People can register for free and get to hear the author of The House in the Cerulean Sea. It's going to be very good. He's a gifted speaker, and I think that the evening will be very enjoyable, whether you've enjoyed the book or not. So give that a read, and that's on March 1st, 7 p.m. 7 p.m. Okay. And let me see what else I have here during a commercial break. Oh, I do have a gnome with me, and it's actually Brendan Nimmo, a bobblehead gnome that the Mets gave away. And I think he's here in the house. So maybe he's the one who's been doing my housework for me that I leave unfinished. I don't know, but you can't point it out or ask questions or say, hey, you didn't do enough, because that will definitely chase the gnomes, the wee folk all away. They will not help you any longer. So enjoy the cleaning that you get. The next slide, we're going to take a look and discuss dragons, serpents, snake temples, petriforms, not petroglyphs, but petroforms, stones that are arranged within nature by humans. And we all see stone walls in New England, and this could just be our mind's eye creating that it looks like a serpent. But when you're looking at these walls, almost at this anchor, you can almost see the amorphic features in both of the head pieces of these stones in the wall behind it. Well, what's happened over the centuries, the stones have been used for pastures and in farms. They've been added to within our agricultural economy over the last 300 years. They've also been removed for buildings, foundations, in homes and barns and in other stone walls. So they could be not resembling their original features of a snake or serpent petroglyph, but we do know that there are petroglyphs, petroglyphs in New England. These are petroforms. Petroglyphs in New England. They're rare, but they do exist in northern New England that show that the snake, the serpent, a horned serpent with a feathered head, sounds like the Eastern dragon, was a deity to the indigenous peoples, a symbol of power, a symbol of mystery. They represented the underworld, because where do snakes come from? In spring, around this time of year, they'll be coming out from under the ground. So that there's this possibility that the earliest peoples here, well before the arrival of the European, that they were worshiping a serpent or snake deity in the form of these walls. Also, there are legends, the legends that continue to today, that their dragons lived in lakes. So they're lake creatures, and in the ocean off of New England. So they're also sea monsters. And there are stone petroglyphs or drawings that show a sea serpent with horns on their head. Take a look at this image. If you look to the right of the stone, it was found in a wall, a stone wall in Roxbury, Connecticut in 2010 by a Woodbury, Connecticut resident. Now, you can see kind of like a serpentine figure with an elongated snout or nose pointing to the right, and on top of his head could be what resembles a horn or horns. Now, lots of folks are divided on this in academia. The archaeologists who observe this are saying that it's probably just natural weathering that appeared on this stone wall in Roxbury. Others, however, say no, that you can see the shape, that it was manipulated by human hands by the indigenous peoples, and so this is a serpent stone, the horned serpent or the feathered serpent. And again, that for the indigenous individuals, these images of the snake, of the serpent, of the dragon, they represented both fear and respect, and were a symbol of power, a very powerful Manitou. Now we have to think about when we go into the woods hiking, you see a stone wall, see how it circumnavigates the woods. It is going in a slithering pattern. And what does the front or the end of that stone wall look like? What's the anchor stone look like? Does it look like a serpent? It could be there well before the farmers came to cultivate those fields. Well, that was dragons. We talked about gnomes in Thyla. We're also going to talk about gnomes in Connecticut. Gnomes lived underground. Gnomes lived underground with kobolds. And a kobold it's a German word for a German creature, and that they're both miners. They're both looking for treasure. They're both acquiring and storing treasure. The kobolds are not cool. Gnomes will, like I said, mentioned earlier, they'll share what they find or point the way to treasure. Kobolds, those are the creatures that are always dropping rocks on the miners' heads, or worse, creating cave-ins. They were nasty creatures, and this wonderful medieval illustration shows them creating all kinds of commotions for humans, and that they're in the barn, they're outside of a cave, they're causing a storm on the water, and they're just nasty, nasty creatures. Why am I showing kobolds, gnomes? Because, here, I love this image. Come crawling out of the ground, scary, don't have that in the bedroom. this illustration here, the large hands, the tunic with the cowl, creatures are not attractive looking. So if you're in a cave, if you're in a mine, that's your occupation, and you encounter kobolds, just let them go their way. They won't bother you usually. Just let them go on their way and do their own thing. But again, as I mentioned, they do create problems. If you feel something poke you or throw a stone at you in one of the caves or near the outside, a mouth of a cave, it's a kobold causing trouble. They're just really beyond mischievous. Why kobolds? Because Cobalt, Connecticut, the anglicized word for kobold, German, cobalt, also the color. Cobalt, Connecticut is named after the kobold. German miners came to this portion of Connecticut in the 1740s, went mining. The mineral wasn't pure enough for them to use, but the name stayed. Cobalt, Connecticut. And there are legends of there being gold in these hills. Now, that would be perfect because that's why kobolds would be there. They're going to be looking for the gold. And where has it gone since earliest colonial times? Maybe it's been all mined and hidden by the kobolds, and it's being guarded over by a dragon. So when you do go to Cobalt, Connecticut, watch out in front of the mine. Don't want to go in. Kobolds, dangerous, especially if you're feeling any kind of heat coming out of a cave. Just a bad situation. Don't go in, and especially don't steal any golden goblets, please. We don't need our villages being burned down. Now, this is the last possible site last I'm going to discuss, but not the last possible site. The last site that I'm going to discuss this evening has to do with sprites, wee folk, elves, the village of the little people. Anybody that's lived in Connecticut may have heard this story, or now with the internet, it's been written about online, and there's all kinds of rumors about the site. Some of the stories are correct. Most of the stories are incorrect. For instance, it's not in Middlebury. The village of the little people is actually in Waterbury, Connecticut. The legend of the village of the little people has to deal with, and there's two variations. One, a man and a wife live in what remains of this home. The wife started to get messages and communicate with fairies and elves in the woods. They directed her to demand her husband to build a village, homes and structures for the little people, for them. Well, these demands became increasingly more and more arduous until the woman and the man both went insane. They were taken away by the authorities to an asylum where they passed away. The wee folk drove them insane. Now, that's pretty standard wee folk activity. When you're not being nice and good, remember, they're dragging you away to wash dishes for 300 years. So they assaulted this couple by having them build these structures. And these are all in the woods, excuse me, on the Middlebury-Waterbury line. And if anybody knows where Maggie McFly's is in Middlebury, the village of the little people is quite near there. I'd be happy to show people on a map the correct location, because there's lots of different directions that are given online, and most of them are wrong. Wrong streets, wrong sites, wrong town. The second variation has to deal with just an individual, one man. But it's the same thematic story. One man meets the fairies, he meets the wee folk, and they make demands of him. Build us a village to live in. Build us a village to live in. Until, again, the voices finally get inside his head and he's driven to insanity. And he too is carted off, where he expires, he passes away in the Connecticut insane asylum, trying to explain that I am not insane, I'm not crazy. There are little people, little creatures that live in the woods, and they're talking to me and they want me to build houses. These are the structures that are in the woods. Now, talking about another version of the story, and folks are open to buy into any variation they'd like. One of the stories has to do with that this was a roadside attraction for the trolley, a trolley attraction, a trolley stop from Woodbury to Middlebury's Lake Quassapog. They stopped off the trolley and they went to this kind of, Disneyland kind of miniature golf looking place that's now overgrown and is compelling people to think of the stories in reverse. These buildings are in the woods. They're obviously been the creations of creatures or human hands that were ordered by the wee folk. Others think, nope. A Disneyland kind of attraction in the woods off of the trolley. Again, that story is not true. That they've said is not true. That's the one that's most often believed. The real story is that in the beginning, I'm going to go back, a fellow by the name of, I can find his name here, William Lannon. William Lannon bought this land on the Waterbury-Middlebury town lines in 1924, and he built a gasoline station. Automobiles just started really to boom. And he said this popular route between the two towns would be excellent moneymaker for a gas station. Well, they built a garage, they built a gas station, fine. And it was really a good business for a few years until the state rerouted that road. And it was further away from the gas station. The main road wasn't there anymore. Oh, William Lannon said, well, what am I going to do with a gas station that has no customers? He said, I have all this land. I'm going to turn it into a nursery for shrubbery, flowers, plants. And that's why he said, I'll build a lighthouse, a little astronomy observatory, mansions, all within my gardens that will help attract people to buy my plants. Well, it didn't work out at all. And he got a job with the gas company. So William Lannon abandoned this land and his property, his buildings, to nature. And then the story started to evolve around the wee folk driving us humans crazy. Now, again, you're all invited to pick whichever version of the story you feel is closest to the truth. But as you get closer and closer to the wee folks mansion, take a look at this last image. Is that a piece of furniture that a fairy or a sprite may have created with their own hands and wings? Or is that a totem? Or is it something that someone's left, a gift to the wee folk? Somebody passing by made it a point? Or might there be somebody else in the Middlebury, Waterbury area being ordered to create furniture now for the wee folk, and he leaves them in the woods for the sprites, elves, and fairies who then bring them into their houses? I don't know. But we can always talk about where this is located, set something up, or I could draw you a map. We can meet near there. We could walk through. I could give you a tour of the place. Not a problem. On that final note, thanks for sharing this journey through mythology and world literature. And please do go to your library or bookstore to acquire copies of Gilgamesh, Beowulf, The Hobbit, and I too have written a few books on paranormal subjects. Please do take care wherever you go on these journeys. Stay safe. Don't go on any private property. And do watch out for dragons, any malicious gnomes, and definitely any sprites or fairies that may be a little bit too evil for our liking. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was really fascinating. I learned a lot about these creatures throughout literature and also some of our local history too. I had not heard of kobolds in Cobalt, Connecticut, so that was so cool to learn. I just want to, before we say goodnight, I just want to give anyone the opportunity to ask a question. You can feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like, or type something in the chat if there's anything that you wanted to ask. And thank you again, Michael, for reminding us that the author TJ Klune is coming to the Sacred Heart University Community Theater on March 1st at 7 o'clock. Seats are sold out, but there's unlimited signups for the virtual version of the presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for everybody for coming out. I mean, there was a lot of information, and I just wanted to keep the conversation to 3 creatures that are appearing in the book, the novel, and then end with places in Connecticut that, yes, these fairy tales, the myths that we think we're reading about in books, they have they've struck a chord here in our own state.
Yes, for sure. Been very interesting about the stone walls too. I love that. They're mysterious. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay.
I guess I've answered every question about dragons and gnomes and sprites, musically and in literature.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you all very much for attending this talk. Thank you so much, Mary Co, Nancy Sweeney, for inviting me here to be to share this information. You guys have a great evening and have a great spring. Oh, we have a question.
Okay. No, something. I'm sorry. Something popped up on my computer.
You got to be careful now because we've been talking about sprites and elves, so we
yeah,
got to watch out.
I hope they come and help me around my house, so I'll have to pay closer attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say, and maybe it was the sprites or elves, but I do know Michael's PowerPoint. And I just want to mention that people may be a little confused. There was music portion to Michael's talk. I don't know, Mike, it was very little hard to hear. So you might want to just mention the 2 pieces that you had in your slideshow.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you want to go back. No, don't be sorry. I think they were kind of like
the Mendelssohn's work, pieces at an exhibition, the first or one part of it entitled The Gnome in the 1870, 1871, and then Felix Mendelssohn's Prelude to A Midsummer Night's Dream. Beautiful pieces of work, beautiful pieces of music. And yeah, we didn't want to blast folks out with the sound, so we had lowered it. But do check those out. You can go online. The Gnome by Mazurski, and you'll get that scuttling kind of creepy sound in his music, and then the evocative sound of fairies passing through fields and forests in Mendelssohn's piece, Prelude to A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Thank you. And I agree with Mary. It was a beautiful presentation and learned a lot.
Yes.
And here too, one of the books, not the Briggs book, but this book is wonderful, provides a lot of immediate information you can get your hands on a world's mythical and legendary creatures, the entire world. And it's a great book. Keep it in your glove compartment in case something crosses the road and you immediately recognize it's not a chupacabra. You have to have this book in the car.
We're getting a lot of people just expressing thanks and
Thank you.
Inspiring. So thank you everyone for your comments and for your participation. And Michael, thank you again. It was really wonderful.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Have a good night, everyone. Take care. Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Bye, everybody.